Folks, just so you know, artificial intelligence has existed in many different ways, including some of the ways that we see today, and has failed in almost every way. And it has done so through antiquity. Greek myths of Hephaestus and Pygmalion incorporated the idea of intelligent automata, such as Talos and artificial beings. Sacred mechanical statues built in Egypt and Greece were believed to be capable of wisdom and emotion. We already, right at the beginning, at the time of antiquity, we have the anthropomorphizing of automatons, much like we do today. Nothing new under the sun. This is what you guys need to understand about these artificial intelligence systems. Man has been striving for this for such a long time. Then we have the 10th century BC. Yan Shi presented King Mu of Zhou with mechanical men, which were capable of moving their bodies independently. Yeah. 384-322 BC, Aristotle described the syllogism, a method of formal mechanical thought in the organon. Aristotle describes means-ends analysis, an algorithm for planning, in Nicomachean Ethics, the same algorithm used by Newell and Simon's General Problem Solver, which was in 1959 an attempt to create an algorithm that would solve general problems, like general AI. 3rd century. Right? We get into that. There's the water clock with the alarm. There's the hero of Alexandria created mechanical men and automatons. It continues, right? We have well, this is just a philosophical one. Then there's some spiritual, artificial creation coming from a spiritual background, including like Arabic alchemical theory. We have the Banu Musa brothers in the 9th century creating a programmable music automaton, describing their book as ingenious devices, a steam-driven flute controlled by a program presented by pins on a revolving cylinder. This was perhaps the first machine with a stored program. And you can kind of look at this. I'm not sure if they actually show it. I don't think there's a picture here. I think I might have got a picture, but you can see it's like just a steam flute. There's precise arithmetic and algebra for an algorithm, which was kind of derived from Al-Khwarizmi, apparently, from this guy. Okay, then we have Ismail al-Jazari created a programmable orchestra of mechanical human beings. And this keeps going, right? 1600 to 1900. The empirical theory of knowledge and inductive logic, the clock for Kepler, in a letter to Kepler, I mean. There's combinatorial theory of cognition, mechanical calculator. Look at this. They invented a mechanical calculator, right? Back in 1642, Pascal. Let's see, Descartes proposed that bodies of animals are nothing more than complex machines. That's it. And so we start to see the idea of Descartes' philosophical leanings going back into the technocratic ideas of man is just a machine, ultimately. It's just electrical inputs and outputs. We keep going. Gulliver's Travels, talking about exactly what we're talking about today. We've talked about what was the other one? 1984 and Brave New World. Sorry, we've talked about that. We have Bernoulli with the utility of the generalization of probability. And now we have the underpinning of what AI is today, which is just statistical probabilities and decision-making based on just pure stats. That's it. We have the formality of the logical method. We have doctrines around the Bayes theorem, which Bayesian math is being used even today, especially in statistical stuff like AI. We have the chess-playing automaton. We have artificial neural networks in 1795 to 1805 that they were like kind of formally mathematically proved. We have the programmable loom. We will get into Joseph Marie Jacquard a little bit more. The reason why I'm dropping this down now is because there is a line to follow about how programming specifically got pushed. And whether the prevailing wind story of women-created programming is true. There's only a little bit of truth to that as it bears out in evidence, and we'll cover the impacts that both men and women have had historically on programming. It's actually kind of a hard. You'd have to define a line and say this is the line where programming was invented, and then say, well, there you go, right? We'll get into that, so we'll put that aside. We have the idea of cyborgs already coming up. We have Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace. I'm sure you've heard of them. We have Boole with Boolean algebra, right? And so the more we keep going now we get closer to the stuff we were talking about here. Now we start talking about neural networks. We start talking about the 20s and 30s with logical, systems and the technocracy, computational based AI as early as 1931 by Gödel. The lambda calculus. I'm sure some of you have heard about lambda in computational theory. And we just keep going and going and going. DARPA around 1940s, 1950s. We showed a PDF where they had an entire conference. DARPA was talking about neural networks. I think it was late 50s, if I'm being honest. Maybe something I might have that wrong. We have von Neumann, who was very, very prominent. We have a bunch of prominent scientists, philosophers, social, what would you call them? Social psychologists, maybe, who all hobnob together, and they push the notion forward of transhumanism. So transhumanism starts to pop up around this time. Transhumanist with feminism, technocracy with feminism, gender fluidity starts to pop up around this time. Mostly after the Second World War, it starts to be very popular. And then this kind of transhumanist movement starts turning into, well, why don't we become cyborgs? And so you see people playing around with chess and checkers. Claude Shannon, who promoted some cryptographic, who created some cryptographic information stuff. Asimov, IBM. Let's see, what else do we have here? MIT creating Lisp with John McCarthy. We covered that. We've got Marvin Minsky, who worked alongside, who was it? I believe it was, I can't remember his name, but he worked alongside someone who essentially created the first AI system at MIT, and then it just continues. And now you have man-computer symbiosis, right? Works start to come out with a cyborg theory where part of your body will be integrated into a machine. You'll have a biological liver or a heart or something like this, but your skin will be an exosuit. Your brain will be attached to a visual receptor, which is essentially a camera. I mean, people thought about this stuff in the 60s. We went over that as well on previous streams. We have MIT, DARPA, the U.S. government, U.S. Naval Research. We talked about Operation Paperclip. If you don't believe it, that's fine. You don't have to. The evidence is all out there. I don't care if you believe it. Just go to the National Archives. Operation Paperclip was very real. Essentially, it was just the ability to bring over scientists from a particular time in Germany that we would all be kind of egregiously against, and expunge their war crime history and bring them into the different facets of the U.S. government for scientific and other research and development. We are going to get a little bit deeper into that today as well. I promise you that is coming up. And so you can see that these people, they create the person who did the first semiconductor alongside the U.S. government. We looked at that patent. That was somebody who was part of the Operation Paperclip movement. They created the first semiconductor. By the way, semiconductors are running in your machine right now as you watch me. So then we create deep learning algorithms. These philosophical ideas of man is not so different from machine continue to get promoted, including bringing, kind of like dragging from the past into the current time, the philosophy behind machine and humans, and the technocratic structure that would be required to make that work across the world. Neural networks continuing. This just continues. We've gone over it, the 70s. So the point of going over this is you can see just how in depth and how historical the idea of artificial intelligence is, and the key core aspects of artificial intelligence require at least two important things. That's why technocracy and cybernetics and transhumanism and all of that have taken such hold in our day and age, including movements that are kind of open to that. Or ideologies that are open to that. Because one, you need a lot of data. And two, you need to have people who understand an electrical system a mathematical electrical system of inputs and outputs. And so as a result, you need to have the technocratic movement, just like in the government of Chile. By the way, okay, now in order to get data, what you need is access to data, and you need to have people opt into it. So one thing that you can't do is force people. One of the things we went over was this guy. I believe it's Mumford. Lewis Mumford. Lewis Mumford was somebody who was very much against the technocratic movement at the time and the promotion of like cyborgs and transhumanism and all of that. And one of the reasons why he was so against it is because he saw the future. He saw this. And what he said was, I fear, essentially, we went over this on a previous Daily Tech News stream. I fear that the technocrats have figured out a way to get what they want by having people like you and me opt in. And he thought about that in the 50s, I believe he said this. He said that the digital enslavement is here because what happens is people opt in to their own enslavement. That's the Brave New World model. In the 1984 model, people they're not opted in. They're forced through fear. But in the Brave New World model, they like it. They like it. So they opt into it, right? And so what we have before us now is the surveillance cap, which is the commodification of personal data by corporations. Guys, I know some of you were thinking this, and I kept my mouth shut. Only a few people knew. But for the longest time, for 1.5 years now, I've been streaming. We're at 93 episodes, so maybe let's say 90, because not all episodes were cybersecurity related. Why do you think I go over cybersecurity issues on pretty much all my episodes? Why do you think I go over scientific studies? Why do you think I go over surveys? Why do you think I go over AI? Yeah, it's boring. Sometimes we have to read a scientific study and we got to slog through the terms, and we're like we're not intelligent enough to read it, but we do it. We do it. Why do you think a high school dropout like me, a dum-dum like me, goes through it? Because we're here. Because it all leads up to this moment. And I had to lay the groundwork for all of these things being true in modernity, then go back in time to prove that they were always true up until modernity. And now we're at the point where we start merging these together. So moving forward, I want you all to shut up about my boring streams. I'm just kidding. But that's why I do what I do. This is planned. My streams are all planned. Everything is planned. Maybe not as well as it should be, but there's a reason why I go over this stuff. So we have the commodification of personal data. So we have things like Google AdWords, search engine optimization, and self-optimization. So this is the thing. Self-optimization, it begins to lead to artificial intelligence, because once you have enough data, then you can apply an artificial intelligence machine such as we have today in order to start making decisions. It's also called the quantified self, which is this stuff where we track your data because you opt in to actually track yourself. With these like Fitbit things, and the Uru rings or whatever the hell they're called, and the Neuralink now, right? It's opted in so that you can give data to the technocratic oligarchy hierarchy structure, whatever it is, and all of this data gets funneled up to the people who control, whatever they want to do with that data. And part of it is AI, right? And so we're opting into it. We have smart cities. We have data collection on your TV. We have no privacy. We have monitoring. All the stuff that people were realizing in the advertising space in the 70s and 80s. See, don't ask. Get, don't ask. Don't ask a person what's important to them, because if they tell you that health is important to them, but then you apply a little like Fitbit thing or whatever on them, you're going to realize just how unimportant health is to most people, which means people act counterintuitively. By the way, this is why AI will never work, because what if an AI system goes, hey, humans really value this thing called health, but then they always act in against their own health. What should I do then? What should I do then? It doesn't know what to do, because human aligned values are not always rational, right? So the entire concept of AI making good decisions for you is completely blown away simply by this alone. It's so insane how this stuff eats itself. Anyways, so then we talk about like things like the surveillance state, which of course we're living in, believe it or not. We are living in the surveillance state right now. Now, I want to be clear that this is, let me just be really clear. I'm going to zoom in here. I want to be really clear. This stuff isn't all bad and nothing but bad. Phones have been a dramatic shift in our world, also for positive. Think about the kinds of things that you can do with your phones and cell phones now. It's actually been a huge positive. Even social media has some huge positives. The internet, some huge positives. Technology for video games. I mean, how many of us get entertainment from video games? Huge positive, right? So I just want to be clear that I'm not saying that the entire tech industry has been built on the backs of evil people and demonic entities and whatnot for the sole purpose of just ruining society, and that you should never use it and you should become Amish and whatnot. No. This stuff has huge positives, including the ability, I'm sitting here right now talking to you people about this stuff because I have however many people I have, I'm not looking right now, at least 5, I hope, who are just like, hey, this is interesting. Let me hear what Spiro has to say. That's positive. I'm trying to bring up the fact that these things get bundled in. They become Trojan horses with other ideologies that you don't want to have playing out. And I'm trying to inform you, whether you're a programmer in the space or a consumer, that this is the kind of stuff that's playing out around you. And you have every right and absolute power to complain about the stuff and say, no, I don't want this. You can be vocal about it in a way that doesn't, end up, putting a target on your back, so to speak. By the way, I love my wife. I love my life. I will never for myself. Okay. I'm just, because I'm going to be getting into some stuff today. I'm putting a target on my back today. All right. So we continue with Pokemon Go. Do you guys remember Pokemon Go? Pokemon Go ended up being basically a massive data collection device. Pokemon Go, I believe, if I remember correctly, don't quote me, I believe they made more money on the data they got from people using Pokemon Go than on the actual usage of the app itself. So I don't think we need to go over this too much, but you can see, I don't think this is a mind-blowing. We all know this happens. We all know data leaks happen. I cover them all the time, right? And that's why I cover them all the time. So if we continue now with all of this data, what happens is that people go, hey, technology moves forward. We have a bunch of data on people. And you know what? We haven't gone far enough. We haven't gone far enough. What we need to do, let me pop this up. We need to merge humans with machine. Transhumanism. We want to enhance the human condition because look at how far technology has come and look at how much data we can get out of you. Julian Huxley, we covered this, Brave New World, popularized the term transhumanism in a 1957 essay. We covered the FM 2030. The FM 2030 was essentially a checklist. It's a PDF. We went over it yesterday. And you answer a bunch of questions. How aligned are you with transhumanism? We covered Max Moore. We covered this. Who created Extropia. Extropia being a transhumanist movement, including cryogenics. And Max Moore and the Extropia movement, the Extropia group, initiated the creation of Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrency. It's almost like I planned this. It's almost like I planned it. Then we have scientific work through the 80s, 90s, 2000s, etc., which start to kind of give you the sense that like, hey, maybe it's not so bad if you merge yourself with machines. We have utopias. We covered this yesterday. We're going to cover a few more utopias today in modernity. Utopias being these sectioned off places. When during Operation Paperclip, there were a few people who joined NASA, what became NASA. NASA? I don't know, whatever, NASA. They joined NASA, and one of the first things that they did, this was their first project. Their first project was to create a cybernetic utopia in space. And this led to, well, hey, we need rockets. Hey, we need artificial intelligence. Hey, we need cyborgs. A man can't live out there, by their own pure biological, state, etc. That ended up being NASA. That movement ended up being NASA. And we see cyber utopias attempting to be created today, including metaverse. We have Nietzsche, who also kind of dabbled in the idea of transhumanism, with the Ubermensch and things like this. But that philosophy played out in philosophical aspects in the scientific community. We have Daedalus. We have the beginning of eugenics and ectogenesis. We have people who worked at Cambridge, Yale, Harvard. We have Arthur C. Clarke's Space Odyssey, etc., the technological singularity. Marvin Minsky, who we talked about before, talks about the concept, at least, of man merging with machine, and it leads to things. We're going to get into this a bit more, so I'm just dropping a few hints here. It leads to stuff like let me see here. Prometheus, loss of human identity, etc. Here, it leads to things like this. What's this? What's this? New eugenics. The tradition of human enhancement originated with the eugenics movement that was once prominent in the biological sciences and was later politicized in various ways. This continuity is especially clear in the case of Julian Huxley himself. The major transhumanist organizations strongly condemn the coercion involved in such policies and reject the racist and classist assumptions on which they were based, along with the pseudoscientific notions that eugenic improvements could be accomplished in a practically meaningful time frame through selective breeding. And so essentially what they're talking about here is opt-in. So they're going like, hey, look, we're not racist and classist, okay? All right? And it's not pseudoscientific for two reasons. So the transhumanists will go, for two reasons you're wrong. Here's why you're wrong. We're not racist because it's opt-in. How are we racist if you opt in? We're not classist because it's opt-in. How are we classist if it's opt-in? Hey, we're not pseudoscientific because it's here right now. The tech is here. You're already slapping stuff on your wrist and on your fingers and in your brains, and you're holding it on your hand, basically attached to your hip. It's already here, bro. How is this pseudoscientific? Just take it just a little step further, and now you're into eugenics, where you're required to have a kind of like transhumanist merge with technology as a eugenic movement, where the people who aren't merged with this, they go away because they can't keep up with the old school biological slow identities, right? This is the kind of stuff that exists right now today, and we're going to get into that. Now, let's dig into transhumanists just a little bit. Okay, we're going to go through this a little bit quickly. We have this article here, Transhumanism, the New Cult of the Digital Age. The technological dystopia is not a distant hypothetical future. It is rapidly approaching. Governments and corporations are already investing heavily in transhumanist technologies, and the first waves of these innovations are being integrated into society. I promise we will go into 2000s and 2010s with the technocracy movement. It leads into this, okay? So we're establishing the foundation of modernity. What things are happening in modernity, and how did the stuff we've learned so far from the 30s onward lead into modernity? So there's Joe Allen, who writes about the idea of transhumanism, the war against humanity. We talked about Julius Huxley, the younger brother of Aldous Huxley. We talked about, I think we've talked about Kurzweil. We now have people like Elon, OpenAI, with artificial intelligence being integrated with you, so on and so forth, okay? So we get this, right? Nothing that we really have to go over here. Now, in order to make all of this happen, in order to make all of this happen, you need to have a system that can be in part self-sustaining. So we talked about this. You have to have something that feeds a large amount of data to a self-sustaining system, so AI. And then you need to have something that exists outside of the system to govern that system. So part of it is AI. Now, I've talked about Operation Paperclip, right? What's really interesting is that we have someone named Nick. So let's start tying in some of these ends. Nick Bostrom is a philosopher known for his work on existential risk and superintelligence risks and so on. So essentially, he's trying to provide awareness to people about like, what the hell are you guys doing? It's very interesting that Nick Bostrom talks about the paperclip scenario. Unlike a biological entity, an AI machine recreating itself when it comes to AGI is essentially the paperclip doomsday scenario. So we're just doing a light intro to bring all of these topics together now. Suppose we have an AI whose only goal is to make as many paperclips as possible. The AI will realize quickly that it would be much better if there were no humans, because humans might decide to switch it off. Because if humans do so, there would be fewer paperclips. Also, human bodies contains a lot of atoms that could be made into paperclips. The future that the AI would be trying to gear towards would be one in which there were a lot of paperclips, but no humans. This, to me, is a really, really, really succinct way of describing the different ideologies that we've been talking about here in a very condensed set of sentences. You have the transhumanist movement built into this. You have the concept of let's give more power to machines. You have the concept of machines recreating more machines. You have the concept of the machines not being able to be controlled. You have the idea of humans initially having control over the machines, which means you would have to have a technocratic architecture over top, right? All of this stuff it's super condensed in here. I found this to be very powerful. And you can see the coalescing of all of these kinds of like insane ideas playing out, but the threads are now kind of spread around, right? So as we continue looking into this, we have something very interesting. So we're going to pull on a single thread. We're going to pull on a few threads, just a little bit at a time. Remember Operation Paperclip? Who do you think was one of the German party people who was brought in? Can anybody take a guess where I'm going with this? Who is one of the German people that was brought into the scientific community? Any guesses? I think there's only one. Oh, yeah, there's Einstein. That was, but not quite though. Not quite. You're close. Werner von Braun. Werner von, I can't even say some of the words here. He was brought in and he helped rocketry and technology. Now, his group was assimilated to NASA. He served as a director of the newly formed Marshall Space Flight Center. And he was the chief architect of the Saturn that propelled the Apollo spacecraft to the moon. By the way, we never went to the moon because the moon's not real. Now, as it so happens, little interesting thing some of you might not know. As it so happens, Werner von Braun wrote a book called Project Mars. He wrote this book in the 1953. Okay. It was published by the University of Illinois Press as the Mars Project because it was based on an earlier book he wrote, which didn't really have a title, The Mars Project. What does he describe in Project Mars? Let's have a look. Let's go down here. Publication history, synopsis. Project Mars, a technical tale, takes place in 1980, 30 years in the future. The world is governed by the United States of Earth, established after a devastating war in the 1970s between the Western powers and the Eastern Bloc, the Soviet Union and its satellite states, as well as Communist China and its satellites. The West won the conflict with the aid of Luneta, an orbiting space station that dropped nukes on the Soviet Union. Soon after peace is declared, a reflecting telescope on Luneta confirms the existence of canals on Mars, vindicating Percival Lowell's assertion that intelligent life exists on the planet. Again, I just want you to remember, we're talking like 30s here, 30s to 50s. The president orders a mission to Mars to establish just how intelligent the Martians are and whether they pose a threat to Earth. Luneta is used as the base from which to launch a 10-space flotilla to Mars. Materials and equipment are ferried from Earth to the space station where the spaceships are constructed and prepared. Von Braun describes in detail the ship's life support systems and the problems caused by cosmic rays, weightlessness, and boredom. Technical details of the voyage are also given, including necessary mid-course maneuvers. Once in orbit around Mars, 3 winged landing craft descend to the surface. And you can see the steam coming out right in your mind's eye. The explorers soon make contact with Martians, who are humanoids in appearance and live underground. Beep, boop, beep, beep. Welcome to Mars. They welcome the Earthlings, who quickly establish the Martians have an ancient and benevolent super civilization. After establishing verbal communication, the humans learn about the Martians' social structure and government, which is run by 10 males under the leadership of who? Under the leadership of who? Under the leadership of who? The Elon. And yes, Elon's dad, or no, I believe maybe his mom, did indeed read the book. And I believe in a I can't remember, in an interview she said that at first they said that the name Elon came from something else, but then I believe whichever parent it was said that they read the book and they were influenced to name Elon after this book. The visitors witnessed technology far superior to their own, including underground transport and organ transplants. They also learn Martian views on ethics, morality, and the responsible use of technology. Lockwood. It's Lockwood. Yeah. Now, things start to make a lot more sense, don't they? As we go, this is why I chose to approach this topic the way I did. Now things are starting to make a lot more sense, right? And you can, if we look at the actual book, this is the actual book, Project Mars. And I just did a search for Elon inside the book. Let's just read what this says. The Martian government was directed by 10 men, the leader of whom was elected by universal suffrage for 5 years and entitled Elon. 2 houses of parliament enacted the laws to be administered by the Elon and his cabinet. The upper house was called the Council of Elders and was limited to a membership of 60 persons, each being appointed for life by the Elon as vacancies occurred by death. In principle, the method was not unlike that by which the College of Cardinals of the Roman Catholic Church is appointed. Usually, the Elon chose historians, churchmen, former cabinet members, or successful economic leaders who could offer lifetimes of valuable experience. The Council of Elders, however, had but limited authority. Proposed laws could be approved or disapproved as presented, but no riders, amendments, or alterations could be voted. The Council of Elders could stimulate, suggest, and test legislation. Its main purpose was not action, but rather to assure the continuity of the basic thought of legislation, as also the protection of that thought. Now, as we bring this into the 2000s, and we talk about what happened with Elon in the 2000s, here is Elon's Wikipedia page, and I think a lot of us know what happened here. He is the grandchild of Joshua Haldeman, a co-founder of the technocratic movement in Canada. That's Elon. Elon is literally the grandchild of one of the co-founders of the technocratic movement, named in Wernher von Braun's book, by name, to go to Mars. Musk founded the space technology company SpaceX, makes a big push for AI with Tesla, XAI, and so on, purchases Twitter, Neuralink, tunnels, like the tunnels under Mars, all of it. All of it. And we already went over how when he was in the White House with Trump, Trump was pushing for taking over Canada and Greenland. Do you know why? Because in the technocracy belief, it was required that for technocracy to play out appropriately, you would need to take over all of America, South America, North America, and guess what else? Greenland. And this was established in the 30s. Elon's grandfather knew both about the technocratic movement and about artificial intelligence and about Wernher von Braun, all of it. And he plays exactly the playbook that was outlined in what we've gone over. And you'll note that ever since he had an out with Trump, you don't hear Trump talking about Greenland much anymore, do you? So we have Elon here, and we have Elon's kind of like rise to fame with, I believe it was, let me see here. I'm pretty sure it was Zip2. There it is. Zip2 was his first kind of thing that he did, and then he got into PayPal. He co-founded Neuralink and OpenAI. He got out of that because he felt like artificial intelligence was getting too weird for him. Now he's pushing it a lot. Gee, I wonder why. Okay, so we have Elon out there in the 2000s. And now we have a very, very interesting concept, which is the concept of certain German ideas continue. They don't end there with the idea of Werner von Braun, okay? They don't end there. We have someone else. So we just drew a direct line between Werner von Braun and the playing out of certain German ideas, certain, I'm talking about World War II German, okay? I'm trying to avoid saying particular names, right? Those ideas are like just in your face. They're not even hiding it. It's just in your face being spread. It's just that people are usually too lazy to, why would they go and look up all this information, right? Now, we have someone else, U.S. tech investor Mark Andreessen of the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz. Now, Mark Andreessen, this guy, okay, thinks that AI is going to take over all jobs except venture capitalists because it's too artistic. He literally said that. We went over it. He's a big guy in the kind of Silicon Valley, space, venture capitalist space, all right? So he talks about the idea of software eating up the world, talks about Airbnb, etc. And out of that comes the concept of Heidegger. Do you guys know who Heidegger is? Heidegger kind of predicted the state that we were going to be in. Heidegger died as the internet was being built, but he had a critique of technology. Heidegger called it the technological inframing. From the standpoint of technological inframing, reality appears as a field of abstract resources amenable to manipulation. If software is eating the world, it is because the world has been inframed in a technological light, reimagined as a set of valves, wires, and diodes to be hacked. Technological inframing is more than just a way of thinking about the world. It is a way of revealing being or reality. And as Heidegger starts to kind of have his philosophy play out before us, there is something very interesting about the way Heidegger explained the world and technology in general. So here's Heidegger, right? And what was it? Here. Take note. Heidegger presents three primary structural features of being in the world: understanding, training the AI, attunement, tuning the AI, or reinforcement learning, and discourse, using the AI. So this concept of how the AI systems even think goes back to Heidegger. And by the way, Heidegger was born in 1889 and died in 1976, and he already had the concept of how you would train, tune, and then interact with AI systems, and how the technological ecosystem would play right into it. So we have this philosophy that's playing out before our eyes. And what happens as a part of this philosophy, now when you start bundling all of this stuff together, you start to see things like people just being far more open about what's going on, with these technological movements. So we have an entire scientific journal dedicated to post-human studies, which is the boundaries between human and the other, technological, biological, and environmental, are eroded, and perceptions of normalcy are challenged. They have generated a range of ethical, philosophical, cultural, and artistic questions that this journal seeks to address. So it's an entire scientific journal dedicated to transhumanism and challenging the concept of what is reality. We have this, the growing liberal attitudes and anti-establishment attitudes inside of technology, the political ideologies of American tech workers. This was a very good study that goes into how people who work in tech have kind of like an opposing set of views, because on the one hand, they want to be liberal, but on the other hand, they also want to be whatever it would be considered like the not liberal. So they did an actual study to determine what kind of ideologies tech workers hold. And yeah, as it turns out, there's a weird mix, because you have anti-establishment and liberalism. Indeed, no other sector sees its employees combining liberal and anti-establishment values as extremely as tech, because it's the technocratic movement built in. It's like, oh, it's almost like it's really weird, right? Because you want to have meritocracy, which technocratic movements kind of like very strictly adhere to. It's ultimate meritocracy. You have to be super credentialed. You have to be the top of the top, creme de la creme scientist mathematician in order to be in a technocratic government. That's meritocracy. When we talk about programmers, yeah, we want people of merit to be writing our code. That's absolutely right. And then at the same time, you want the liberal aspect of it where, yeah, but we want you to write code that allows for us to merge with machines because fluidity and we're all machines anyways. Right? It's a very weird mix, this field of both of these kind of what would most likely be opposing ideas in any other field, attempting to be merged. So this scientific paper, this is a scientific paper, goes into exactly how this plays out, how these ideologies not play out, but how they're like self-reported, let's say, across workers, leaders, companies in Silicon Valley, etc. And there is a huge coalescing of these ideas in Silicon Valley and in the tech industry around Silicon Valley geographically. It's not even just in the field in general globally, but there's something about the Silicon Valley in particular that draws these kind of opposing ideas where people just, it's almost like they're working against themselves. And it's no wonder, because it's around the time of like the 2000s and whatnot. These are just, I don't think there's anything else in here that I want to go over. I don't think so. It's around the time of the 2000s and 2010s that power starts to coalesce because of the amount of information that people receive at building companies like Facebook and whatnot. And then they start to promote whatever ideas they want, no matter how mangled and mixed they are. And as a result of that, you start seeing things being created like React, which is the democratizing of meritocracy in a programming way. You see a lot of garbage collector stuff becoming way more prominent. You see clean code, you see object-oriented programming, because it starts to infect the way people code, literally. The ideologies behind this stuff that has been brewing and brewing and brewing for a long time starts infecting how you think about the very code you create. For example, Rust. Here is a Rust 2024 State of Rust survey. And they ask a bunch of questions that are like so irrelevant to what the programming language should be. We asked the group that selected yes, which specific groups they identified as being a member of. The majority of those who consider themselves a member of an underrepresented or marginalized group in technology identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or otherwise non-heterosexual. Margaret Mead is clapping from her grave right now. The second most selected option was neurodivergent at 46%, followed by trans at 35%. This is like 1,110 answers broken down by how you identify either ethnically or sexually. Why? Why does this matter? Because the concept of these kind of losing your identity as a human being and being fluid about who you are, and you're just a machine, so on and so forth, well, it brings people into technologies like here, Shane Miller, who is part of the Rust Foundation as a chair, and they've had a lot of political, fallout for their political and ideological stances, and you have people like this who promote it heavily. They use the technology as a Trojan horse for what they believe, right? Rust isn't the only one that's doing this, but it's an easy one to pick out because they're so open about it. You have, by the way, we're going to talk about Palantir in a minute. Here is Rust with the team listed out here. Okay, this is the Rust team. I think this was 2024. This is I think it's an older site. I can't remember. But there's somebody in here that's very interesting. You have Stephen Fackler here from the library team. The Rust Standard Library, Rust Lang crates, conventions, and ecosystem support. I've looked up every single one of these people. Every single one. And might I point you to Stephen Fackler's GitHub. Stephen Fackler has a bunch of Rust stuff. And, where does he work? Interesting. Interesting. As a matter of fact, he has a patent with a few other people at Palantir from 2023, I believe. He is heavily working with Palantir. And yet we find him amongst these groups. Now, why would this matter? Why would this matter? Well, maybe it doesn't really matter that much. Until let me pull this up. Until you look at who created Palantir. A person called Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel created Palantir, Founders Fund, Valor Ventures, Mithril Capital. So essentially, he was a big D&D guy, loves Lord of the Rings, and names his companies based on names inside of Lord of the Rings. And he made a boatload of money through a bunch of investments and stuff that he's done. He supports individualism and libertarianism. So now we have somebody who's kind of on the opposite end of what you would typically consider the left. He would probably find himself more on the right. So he does work, he's published work. That's what I mean to say, that goes against the idea of diversity and intersectionality and communism and things like that. He promotes the idea of like Christianity quite a bit, at least currently. Meritocracy in the sense that you and I would probably, think of meritocracy. Things like this. He was participated in the PayPal mafia, so buddies with Elon, etc. General Electric, he had a lot of work with them, Walmart, etc. And Palantir is essentially a very, very big part of what's going on in the tech industry today. It's a big data analysis company named after the token artifact. So essentially what they do is they data mine, which now leads us back to the concept of you need to have data to operate these things. Palantir's first backer was the CIA agency's venture capital arm, InQtel. It grew to be $20 billion. He participated in Facebook, and so I blame him partially for the creation of React, Airbnb, 1517 Fund, Y Combinator, Elevate, Gawker, all that kind of stuff. Now, when we look at what Palantir is getting themselves involved with now, today, something like Rust makes perfect sense, because Rust is a counterculture, right? And so you would want to use something like Rust, and you would want to use something like other ideologies in the programming space to create a counterculture so that you can promote your own ideology. These battles have been playing out for a long time, and they just play out in different ways in modernity. Palantir themselves was trying to say, hey guys, no, this is Palantir's blog. Like, no, we're not a data company. But in their own blog, they basically admit that, yeah, we're a data company. Yeah, we are a data company, but we're not a data company. Okay, I just want you to know that we're not a data company, but we are a data company. So they're doing a very, very big campaign to present themselves as something that, they've been kind of, what would you say, accused of being. Why? Trump taps Palantir to compile data on Americans. And by the way, for those of you who are wondering if I'm going to get into Trump, there is a history with Trump, but it's not going to fit on the stream. So we're going to have to pull on that thread separately, okay? But Trump, yes, did ask Palantir to participate in data mining for the purposes of pushing forward AI and other reasons. I don't know if this actually came to fruition. I have to confirm that it did based on the passing of the big bill. But at the very least, they were working together, okay? And when you look at what Palantir is involved in, well, they love artificial intelligence. They love facial recognition software. This is the Palantir Wikipedia page. They love the idea of watching as many things as they can for the purposes of helping companies. They sometimes use words like intelligence augmentation. Where is it? Here, intelligence augmentation, etc. Right? So we can see how Elon, how Peter Thiel, how these companies, Extropia, the transhumanist movements, etc., all play into this. They are all participating in their own version of all the stuff we've been talking about, and it doesn't end there. One sec. Here, very quickly, you can just see, I had this one open, I should have shown it. This is Palantir's website, AI-powered automation for every decision. You can see it here. I mean, come on. How do you do this without gathering all the data that you can possibly get? Okay, so don't tell me that you're not. Look, they even have a VR headset. Okay, I mean, they've really gone into it. If you just take a look, if you just poke around the Palantir website, you can see just how far they want to push this stuff. Now, around the same time as these people were popping up, we have someone else who popped up. Curtis Yarvin, who created a company called Urbit. And Curtis Yarvin wanted to have a decentralized server platform with a peer-to-peer network, and he called it Urbit. Created in around 2010, launched in 2013. The first user version was in 2020, and I believe it exists to some degree today, but not exactly in the same degree. It received funding from, oh, guess who? Peter Thiel and Andreessen, Mark Andreessen, who we talked about. Now, who is Curtis Yarvin? Well, Curtis Yarvin has brought up the idea of techno-feudalism, digital feudalism right here in a blog post in 2019. Yarvin said Urbit is not designed as a political structure. He denied in 2022 that Urbit was digital feudalism, although he brought it up. He did talk about something else. He talked about dark enlightenment and neo-reactionary. The word neo-reactionary, he brought it into the forefront. He has a blog post under a pen name called Mencius Moldbug, called unqualifiedreservations.org. He has a bunch of PDFs, and he talks about his own view on how technology should be used, including an ideological bends. So he kind of deconstructs his own view of like conservatism and liberalism and stuff like that. That leaves libertarians. I love libertarians to death. My CPU practically has a permanent open socket to the Mises Institute, which is whatever this is. Okay, there's a bunch of like, anyway, it's a bunch of ideological stuff in here, essentially. In my opinion, anyone who has intentionally chosen to remain ignorant of libertarian thought in an era where a couple of mouse clicks will feed you enough high-test libertarianism to drown a mouse is not an intellectually serious person. So he comes up with the idea of like neo-reactionary movements and dark enlightenment. I don't think he does it in here. Enlightenment, I don't think it's in here. Let me switch over to this other thing. It's that one. Okay. And so here we have Curtis Yarvin. There's his Wikipedia page. However, he ends up being far right. So again, we find ourselves in this weird position where he's pulling in different kinds of concepts and ideas as he's blogging, but he essentially ends up in a world of like more conservative right wing, essentially. It's the reason why is because these ideas are starting to get mixed up in people's minds. This is the problem. This is why it starts to break down at this point, because people are mixing up ideas and thinking that they can somehow bring them together, that you can have a bit of both. You can have your cake and eat it too, but they're just not doing it very well. And so when you read his blog posts, which I've read a few, and some of his books and some of his interviews, it's kind of weird. You don't really get it's hard to start figuring out like what does like Peter Thiel really think? What does Curtis Yarvin really think? But the problem isn't that they're a little bit confusing in the way that they state their beliefs. The problem is that they then fund those beliefs. They bundle in those beliefs into technology. And that's why people have these weird dichotomies in tech where they'll use a logical system like programming, which is purely the laws of logic, but they will try and embed a liberal framework on top of it, which in today's world would be like, don't use the term blacklist or whitelist. Don't use the term master, use the term main, things like this. And then these two things don't make sense. This is playing out. It starts out with the people who are actually stating these things, and that it infects the way that we program. These ideas become just as confusing down here as they are up there. As above, so below. So he starts talking about things like dark enlightenment and the neo-reactionary movement, which started around the late 2000s. The idea being here that, well, we can, you know what? I think we can just kind of go into it a little bit. But I just want to bring out that Jarvis helped J.D. Vance become who he is today. The same J.D. Vance who promoted Doge, which at the time was considered rage. It was called rage, I believe. He was an advocate of the acronym RAGE, which he defined as retire all government employees. That was in 2012. And then J.D. Vance comes in and along with Elon, they go Doge. They reframe it as Doge. Now, Dark Enlightenment, it's abbreviated to the Neo-Reactionary Movement, NRX, is an anti-democratic, anti-egalitarian, and reactionary philosophical and political movement. A reaction against Enlightenment values, it favors a return to traditional societal constructs and forms of government, such as absolute monarchism and cameralism. Influenced by libertarianism, the movement advocates for authoritarian capitalist city-states which compete for citizens. Neo-reactionaries refer to contemporary liberal society and institutions which they oppose as the cathedral. And so the cathedral influences public discourse to promote progressivism and political correctness, which they view as a threat to Western civilization. This movement also espouses scientific racism, which is the belief that humans are divided into biologically distinct taxa called races, and that empirical evidence exists to support or justify racial discrimination, inferiority, or racial superiority. It is a pseudoscientific view which they claim is suppressed by the cathedral. This is very, very strange because it's like all of these opposing views coming together and attempted to be promoted. Steve Bannon, J.D. Vance, Michael Anton, even Donald Trump, hobnob with Curtis Yarvin, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, etc. And this idea of feudalism, the cathedral, this absolute monarchism and all of that stuff plays out in the decisions that they make at a governmental level. Here's an article on the recurrence of neo-reactionaries. And this article goes into how neo-reactionaries kind of they kind of ebb and flow. There's someone called Nick Land who helped to promote neo-reactionary ideology on 4chan and Reddit and other groups. And they kind of promote their ideology through technical means, and they do it to anybody who will listen and point to things that make their case and then ignore points that don't, essentially. So people are aware of this kind of movement. They know that it exists and they know the people behind them. There are plenty of articles you can find like this one. There's tons out there, right? So as we continue now, what we see is all of these people start to coalesce at the top, and you have the broligarchy. We have the broligarchy. And so you can see tech trillionaires coming together. Okay, Washington, D.C., January 20th, 2025. Guests include Mark Zuckerberg, Lauren Sanchez, Jeff Bezos, Sundar Pichai, Elon Musk attend the inauguration of Donald Trump. And I haven't even got into Zuck very much or the other ones. We're going to pull on those threads individually. I just wanted to bring out a few. And you can see how they've consolidated power, because as people have more and more dependency on technology, they essentially control it. There are ties to Rockefeller, the British East India Company, J.P. Morgan, etc. We'll pull on the threads. Don't worry, we'll get there. But these people are using technology and implementing their ideology into it, and they're now standing at the top. Vanguard, BlackRock, now we have OpenAI, we have, what's that place called? I can't remember. There's a company that's propping up a lot of these AI companies. I can't remember what it's called, et cetera, right? So you can see how these things coalesced, coming up from the 2000s onward. Now, there are some other movements that are also happening around this time as contemporaries. The hype cycle of object-oriented programming, we went over that, right? We went over the clean code, this article, The Economics of Clean Code. Clean code starts to take a hold. ideological, like I said, with Rust, right? These things, these kinds of ideologies and ideas start to take hold. We start having movements where they want to, where people want to have kind of like their own independent space among cyberspace. We covered that in the 1900s, but it starts to really pump up in the 2000s. So you have cyberspace and people wanting to block off their own portion of cyberspace. So they start doing things like pushing forward Bitcoin and blockchain transactions, and NFTs start to become a thing, and personal kind of groups start to form. The Electronic Frontier Foundation was partially formed around this. We'll get into the history of the EFF as well. We have other things popping up as well, including cults. We've already talked about some cults that exist, like the VMNZ or whatever. Let me just go on to another one. We have the Zizian cults. Okay, it's a cult-like group referred to as the Zizians, linked to a string of violent deaths across the U.S. It has its roots in Silicon Valley. They're a movement called rationalism. Who are these groups and what do they believe? A cult-like group is believed to be behind a string of violent deaths across the United States. On New Year's Eve in 2022, Rita and Richard Zacher were shocked and unfortunately 404'd in their home in suburban Philadelphia. Who are they? Let's go down a little bit. Yep. They've done several attacks. Some people survived. The Zizians have roots in Silicon Valley AI research and a community known as the Rationalists. So Max Reed is apparently one of them. Hi, Deborah. How are you? Says Max Reed. I'm okay. Let's start with Ziz in the group. And we should say they may not call themselves that in the group's founder, known as Ziz. Tell us a little more. Ziz comes from Alaska. She went to school at Fairbanks and moved to the Bay Area in 2016. And she wanted to find a job in the tech industry and became involved in what's known as AI safety or alignment, which at the time, we've probably all heard these terms more recently because of how big the AI industry has become. But at the time, it was much more of a sort of niche concern. The main idea of which was that as we're creating more and more powerful AI systems, we might one day create a system so powerful, so intelligent, so conscious, that we have an obligation to ensure it's aligned with human value, so to speak. And this was, at the time, and still is a main concern of what's known as the rationalist movement, what tends to call itself the rationalist movement. So she got a few people together who had the same idea. People outside were not taking AI alignment seriously enough. So protests start happening. We called ourselves the Zizian, wearing Guy Fawkes masks in the manner of Anonymous, handing out flyers, instructing people to spurn the rationalist leadership. So on the one hand, I can actually kind of agree with the principle behind the concept here. Hey, let's make people aware of the danger pushing forward AI and artificial general intelligence should we ever get there. However, how they get there as rationalists become very, very dangerous. So as they continue to grow, what is the really big main theme here connected to these killings? Like why rationalists, this is the person interviewing, why, if they are in fact supposed to use scientific thought to improve the world and do good, how do we go from clearly using violence and being interconnected? And the person who is a Zizian says, it seems worth noting that the rationalist movement, so to speak, what is called rationalism in this context and in the Bay Area and around Silicon Valley, is maybe not identical to the rationalism of, say, René Descartes or the philosophers who might have called themselves rationalists. In some ways, a sort of self-help movement, and in some ways, a kind of gathering place for people with particular interest in AI and other kinds of big long-term thinking. And a characteristic feature isn't simply using reason to live a better life or to figure out what good politics might be, but to unburden yourself of the unconventional wisdom or morality that is irrational, and therefore holding you back from understanding the sort of the true best in life. And I think that means in practice pursuing these very abstract philosophical games and experiments, and then trying to live your life in concert with the conclusions you draw from those. So maybe a less difficult version of this, or a less fraught version of this, is what eventually came to be called effective altruism, which is the sort of philanthropic idea that the main goal, if you're giving money away, if you're donating to charity, is to save as many lives as possible. Wait, but how does this get into the extremes? The answer is veganism. Veganism Yes. How strongly a person might come to believe in the crime that is factory farming or killing animals if you believe they are sentient and can feel pain. And if you take the idea seriously, if you take it so seriously that you rearrange your life, you might begin to believe that you're justified in 404ing people in order to do what's best for the animal. Can you see how these kinds of ideologies get injected and maybe even stem from philosophies out of technocracy? There's an interplay. There's like a yin and yang here where these things play against each other. They use each other to push and pull society, and it's becoming more abstract, more, let's say, fragmented, and it becomes harder to track in today's day and age. It might be the case that I'm not going to be able to do as good a job covering what's going on in modernity because of idiotic statements like this, with the fragmentation of AI and just the raw, push forward with these systems. I might not be able to do as good a job unless I wait 20 years. Hopefully I live that long. And then I do a retrospective on like what happened in the 2010s, 2020s, and I might be able to come up with a better summary. But this kind of stuff is wild. This cult came up out of the concept of AI as like, hey, we don't really like the way that AI is going. Let's do something about it. Let me see if there's any. Yes. Okay. And then continuing on with the idea of the counterculture, we want to separate ourselves from kind of like the world around us. You have the Seasteading Institute, which is not a cult, but it's something similar. Maybe not similar to a cult, but essentially what this is it's a tech for 10,000 startup countries. You essentially build these like tech startup outposts in the sea, and it's funded by people we've talked about. I believe one of the funders of Seasteading investors, I believe it's Peter Thiel. Is it Peter Thiel? Let's see. Yeah, Peter Thiel. There you go. And so what they want to do is they want to create their own utopia, just like after Operation Paperclip, the scientists from Germany were creating space-based utopias, technical utopias, which became NASA. The utopias on Mars, etc. And have a look. You can have a helicopter, land on this place, right? And so these cults, these transhumanists that we covered yesterday, a bunch of transhumanist cults we covered yesterday, the philosophies behind it starting to get merged and becoming weird, and people can't differentiate between the two things, right? All of these things start to play out in the 2000s and the 2010s. We also have stuff like Less Wrong, which is essentially a group of people who also have weird kind of like, hey, AI alignment stuff is bad. There's AI dangers, but then they promote other stuff that doesn't kind of like add up with it. It doesn't make a heck of a lot of logical sense. Some of the stuff they talk about with regards to things like chemistry, I believe there's one here, biology, things like that. You start seeing these weird groups pop up out of here, and they embed these long-term technocratic ideologies, philosophies, German backgrounds, whatever. At the same time, by the way, do you guys remember the Chilean government? Well, guess what? It's not over. It's happening right here in my country. Yeah, Less Wrong is Yudkowsky. Yeah, we'll pull on that thread. That's right. We'll go into Less Wrong with Yudkowsky. Yeah. Right here in my country, where anytime I have to go anywhere, I have to hop on a Mies. We don't have Uber. We have Mieser. And you swipe right or left on good-looking Mies. Okay, you got to get the strong ones. And then a Mies hops up. And a moose, okay? I say Mies for multiple. I screwed that up. It's a moose, okay? You get a good-looking moose, right? And you hop on, and it gives you a ride to the closest maple syrup store, and then you drink the maple syrup, and it empowers you for the day. That's all we have. We don't actually have food here. If you ever come to Canada, there's no food here. It's just bottles of maple syrup. We just hand them around, okay, as we ride on our Mies. Do you remember the Chilean government in Cybersyn? That was the name of the technocratic government that they actually established. CYBERSYN. MapleSync. Yeah. Project MapleSync. Proposed cybernetic economic planning for Canada. That's right. It's happening here. This started in the late 2010s, and it is continuing to be thought of here in the 2020s. The kernel of the idea is Project MapleSync, an inclusive, open source, distributed economic decision-making system for Canada. MapleSync is a proposal for open source, national level accounting and strategic indicative planning systems that anyone can contribute to. The idea is that by providing better baseline information to entrepreneurs and more, we build capacity for greater prosperity in terms of economic, social, and environmental wealth. This cybernetics, by the way, is just a different name for technocracy. So they've just taken technocracy and they've made a few tweaks. Open source, which is, by the way, socialist, communist adjacent, okay? It's socialist, let's just be real here. Open source is socialist, communist adjacent, all right? Okay? It's just open sourcing, gathering a bunch of data, and then having people make decisions on it. It's just a twist on technocracy and cybernetics. Okay, so this stuff continues. The cults continues. The belief systems continue. We have this. Transhumanism continues. The Methuselah Foundation. Methuselah is based on a biblical person, the grandfather of Noah in the Hebrew Bible, whose lifespan was recorded as 969, right? And what this foundation wants to do is they would like to have, by 2030, tissue engineering and regenerative medicine therapies. This is essentially life extension through scientific and technical integration. This is transhumanism for the elongating of life, no pun intended. Oh, and look at this. We see NASA again. Okay, so that essentially lays down the groundwork for everything. We are going to, in the future, get into some of this. A Greek person that I have a love-hate relationship for, partially because he's a fellow Greek, and sometimes he says smart stuff, and sometimes he says the stupidest stuff on the planet. We'll get into him. He talks about techno-feudalism, crypto, the left and the right. He does bring up some good points, the oligarchy, stuff like that. But we've essentially laid the groundwork now. We are now in modernity. We're basically caught up, and I've dropped basically, as many examples as I could in a short amount of time of all of these kinds of ideas playing out throughout the decades. And you can see how it impacts the way that technology is created, the way that we code, the way that hardware is now being generated, why the majestic 7 in the stock exchange are holding on to so much power and money using AI. All of this stuff, it all interplays historically and currently. So moving forward, what this means is that I can now focus on specific elements, maybe specific people, and take some time and build out some of these narratives a bit more.